thank you for joining us on this Tuesday morning. I'm Amanda. I am the SEND Parents Lead here at Twinkl, and I'm joined by my inclusion colleague, Susie. I'm very excited to have Meggie and Tanya here from Dingley's Promise, and I really hope it's going to be a really useful session. I will pass over to Meggie now and let her introduce herself.
Hello, thank you all so much for joining us this morning, and we're really looking forward to talking to you about understanding behaviour for children with SEND. So my name's Meggie Fisher. I'm the Head of Quality for Dingley's Promise. For those of you who don't know Dingley's Promise, and this is the first time you've come across us, we are the largest earliest specialist SEND organisation in the UK. We have 12 specialist nurseries across the Midlands and the South Coast. We have an online training platform where we take everything we learn from working on the ground floor with our fantastic children and families and turn it into training and support for nursery settings and those working in the mainstream world to help better understand how they can support children. And we have some courses available for parents as well. So please do check out our website. We've got lots of free resources to help support parents and families as well with their children. So we're really excited to talk to you about understanding behaviour for children with SEND. I'll just introduce you to my colleague Tanya.
Hello, my name's Tanya. I'm the Family Support Manager for Dingley's Promise. I guess from my own perspective, I've been working in this field for about 13 years or perhaps even more than that now. And the reason that I went into this field was because I've got 3 neurodivergent boys of my own who are much, much older now. And one of whom has also got a physical disability. So lots of what I've based my career on, and the reason I'm so passionate about this area in particular, has come out of learning from them and needing to teach myself to be the parent that they needed and not the parent that I thought I was going to be. I'm really looking forward to spending the next hour with you alongside Meggie. So I'll hand back to Meggie for this very first bit.
So Tanya, you're on the slides, yeah? Just as a caveat, we do have some photographs of children from our centres within this. We do have all of the permissions in place, and we've given consent for these to be used in this recorded resource. So please don't worry about anyone in the photographs. So today we are going to have a quick run through of what we mean by what regulated means and looks like, why this is important for our children as a whole, but particularly our children with SEND, why this can sometimes feel really tricky to support our children with SEND, and lastly, we are going to make sure we try and give you some strategies that can help. We can't solve every problem and give you every solution, but we can give you things to try and hopefully give you a platform to move forward in supporting your children. Throughout this session, we may use a range of different terminology, so we just want to do a quick stop check to help make sure that we're all on the same page. Some of the words that you might hear are neurodiversity, and this is just a variation in human brains, the different ways that brains can work. Neurodivergent is when we're talking about one person in particular. So a single person will be neurodivergent, but as a group in this room, we are neurodiverse and we have neurodiversity. Neurotypical is what we use for the majority of brains that work in a particular way. This is the sort of anticipated way that brains develop. Dysregulated is not feeling able to engage, not being able to calm, and it can be expressed in lots of different ways, whether this is children getting quite upset, seem to be acting out, they can show quite physical behaviours, they can come quite withdrawn. Dysregulated will look very different for different people. We're going to talk a bit about sensory processing, which is our ability to use our senses to take on board all of that sensory information around us, and the way that our brain then interprets these signals. So particularly in neurodivergent individuals, there can be significant differences in how this works, and what we consider normal might actually be too much or not enough for some of our neurodivergent children. And lastly, we might touch on intersectionality, which is that no one brain fits into one diagnosis, no one person fits into one way of being. This was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, which actually she was talking about the intersections of Black women and the world that they experience. Intersectionality has expanded and now talks about the way that children with SEND may experience different intersections, such as poverty, or different types of neurotypes may have a physical disability and a neurotype alongside that. So there's lots of different intersections that people may be facing. So hopefully that's just a quick whistle-stop tour on some of the terminology you might hear today, so that hopefully you feel confident in following what we're discussing. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. This webinar is called Understanding Behaviour, but ultimately we're going to be looking at behaviour that we ourselves are finding challenging, because often when we talk about behaviour, that's really what we mean. So what do we mean by behaviours that challenge? That's typically, as parents, behaviour that we are finding difficult in the moment to manage, that we feel is unsafe, or that we feel is inappropriate. And this slide gives you an idea of what I mean, but it's really an endless list, isn't it, as parents? And all of our children are very unique. So it can be things like self-injurious behaviour, such as headbanging. It might be hitting out or hurting others when we feel frustrated. It might be breaking resources, becoming very, very distressed at different situations during the day. It might even just be simply that your child is acting in a way that we feel is inappropriate at that time, or that we've been told that they shouldn't be doing that. And it could be any of these things, but ultimately it's behaviour that we're finding hard to deal with as parents, and that we're not quite sure what to do or what's expected of us. And when we talk about that, that's kind of what I'm meaning. So I've started with this quote because this quote means quite a lot to me when it comes to thinking about behaviour. This is a quote by someone called Dr. Ross Greene, and he wrote a book called The Explosive Child that's actually been around for quite a lot of years now, and I think had a couple of different rewrites. But he was quite ahead of his time when he spoke about behaviour in children, particularly children with SEND. And what he said is that when kids don't do what we want them to do, or they're not doing what we think they should be doing, or we're telling them to do, we make an assumption that's because they don't want to, or they can't be bothered, or they're being defiant, or they're being lazy. And there's lots of different things as parents we might have as narratives in our head. And ultimately we're thinking, but they should be doing as we're telling them. And we try and make them do it. And sometimes as parents, we get cross or we get frustrated because they're not doing the thing we've asked them to do. And the same when a child gets dysregulated and acts out, we can assume that we can modify that behaviour by using kind of these age-old sanction and reward systems. But what Dr. Ross Greene said was that we need to make the assumption that children are always doing as well as they can in that moment with the skills that they have and in the environment that they're in. And so we're always working on the baseline assumption that they can't do this yet if they're not doing it, that they're actually doing as well as they can, even if we're struggling with that at the moment. And that's a really big shift in our head as parents, because that's often not how we've been wired to parent our children. And that applies to all age groups. So it doesn't matter if you've got very teeny tiny children all the way up to teenagers and even into adulthood. If we lack the skills to manage a situation effectively, we simply can't do what we're being asked to do. It's not an act of defiance. It's that we don't have the tools in our toolbox to do it yet. And what that means for us as parents is that rewards and consequences, as we're probably all aware by now because we're sat here together, will not be effective. And you can be doing that from morning to night and it still won't change what's going on for your child. Because if you simply can't do something, or you don't have those skills yet, or your brain works in a different way, a reward or a consequence won't make it possible. And this workshop builds on this baseline assumption that to create a calm environment as parents, we need to be curious and we need to calm ourselves first. And we need to collaborate with the children that we have to meet their needs and our needs as well, because we're important too. So this is just the basic understanding that if a child simply lacks the skills to do something, they're not choosing not to do it. They're not choosing to behave in that way. But this allows us to be compassionate and take on the role of the adult. So I just want you to think about this quickly. So why haven't I called this managing challenging behaviour here? Why is it that I framed it as understanding behaviour? And I can't access a chat or anything at the moment, so I just want you to think about this in your own head. how does it change your perspective on the term challenging behaviour if this is called managing challenging behaviour? And would that change what you thought were the contents of this behaviour if I called it that? So for me, as a parent first, and also as a manager of a family support service, I think language is one of the most important tools that I have. And the reason for that is that language for me is how I frame the problem in my head and then respond to it. And it also has a massive impact on how other people perceive that problem as well. And I feel that when we use the term challenging behaviour, that places the blame on the child. So it assumes that that challenging behaviour is being controlled by them. And I also feel that when we use terms like that, that can stick around as a legacy for our children. It's often written into reports. It's the narrative that's spoken about them. And it sometimes ends up in our children being labelled in our own heads and in other people's heads as sort of naughty or doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Whereas for me, when we switch that round and we talk about behaviour that challenges, we're forced to think about who's being challenged in that moment. And is it the child that's being challenged, or is it actually us that's being challenged by this situation? And anyone who works with me will know how passionate I am about this. And I strongly believe that by reframing our understanding of what's going on for our children, we have the power to change that situation. So by changing our own mindset first, that's how we control this situation. And we're just going to go on to the next slide for some more ideas around this concept and answers to this question. So this workshop specifically is focusing on our children that might have special educational needs or disabilities. It may be that they have a very specific learning need. It may be that they have a physical disability. It may be that they're neurodivergent, so they might be on a pathway for an autism assessment. You may suspect that maybe they're ADHD, maybe you've got a lot of neurodiversity in your family. It really doesn't matter what different need your child has for the purposes of this workshop. At this point, it might just be that you've identified that they're developing slightly differently to other children that you've had or to other children in their setting. And often children with SEN can feel very confused and overwhelmed by the world and the environment that they're in, just because that world and that environment might not be set up yet to meet their needs. But this can be framed as having challenging behaviour. And when we describe challenging behaviour, we might then focus on that very individualised behaviour, or a bunch of them that we feel we can't tolerate or allow, or they're dangerous, or they're hard for us to manage, or they feel inappropriate. And that means the focus is often on trying to stop them or change that individual behaviour, as we might see that as helping that child with their quality of life or helping us to manage. But really what we are saying is that that behaviour is challenging for us, and often we're not thinking about our young person at all when we get focused on that individual behaviour. And that means we might lose our curiosity about the situation, and also forget that everyone as a human is complicated. We might describe our children as complex, but what we're really saying is we don't really understand why you're doing this or what's going on for you. And if we really think about ourselves as humans, we're very complicated, right? There's lots of reasons why I might do things that even I'm not quite sure why I'm doing them. And our children are no different. So sometimes when we get focused on those individual behaviours, we lose the whole wider context of what might be going on for them as a human. It's also worth mentioning here that although we've talked a lot so far about dysregulated behaviour or distressed behaviour, the behaviour that we're seeing might not be one of distress. It might be a response to a sensory environment, because that child, your child, has a different way of reacting with the world. Of experiencing that sensory world, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. It might be that your child is stimming. So stimming is self-stimulatory behaviour, and we're going to talk about that a bit later, but it might be for pleasure or to self-regulate. Or it might just be a way your child's interacting with the world that's completely different to what you're expecting as a parent. And because our children often need different things to thrive, it's not our fault that we're still learning about the world with them at the same time. And almost everything I've learned about the world up until this point has come from my children teaching me. And that's been a really uncomfortable process, because we have children and we expect to know what to do with them, and that we're hardwired to be able to parent them in the way they need. And actually, what I learned is that it's our responsibility to try and understand them and to adjust ourselves to them. And that's a really difficult shift often. So this workshop is very much about how we frame and understand and respond to the child that we have, and not the child that we thought we were going to have. So we're going to start a little bit with the science. So when we're talking about being distressed or being dysregulated, it's really helpful for us to understand the science behind that. So this diagram shows you something called the window of tolerance. So you might be aware of this if you've learned about trauma-informed approaches at some point in your life. And all of us need to be in this middle window, in the window of tolerance, to be able to listen and learn and engage and feel comfortable. And if we're triggered by something, we might become dysregulated and move outside of that window. And often when we're triggered outside of that window, it's not that something, it might be that something's happened in the moment. So for example, where are you on here right now? Like, hopefully I'm not triggering you outside of your window of tolerance just by talking to you. But it can be that something is the last straw for you, and actually you've built up a lot of different stresses. It might be for you personally. Maybe there's lots going on in your life. You're carrying a huge mental load. There's lots of things you need to remember. Things have been really stressful. And that build up means that you are much more likely to be pushed outside of that window of tolerance, even by something that seems minor in the moment. And often when our children are triggered outside of this, what we see on the outside is an undesirable behaviour. We might focus very hard on that behaviour, and we might think that it's deliberate. So for example, we might see them become very argumentative, or break things, or throw things, or even be described as being aggressive in that moment, or running away. We might see them shutting down, and we might see them not answering us when we're talking to them, or even showing self-injurious behaviour. And it can be really easy to think that this is deliberate or purposeful, or they're making a choice to do that. But what's really important to understand about the science of this is when you move outside of that window of tolerance, you're actually flooded with hormones. It's a physiological process that can actually drive you into fight or flight. And we're going to look at that a little bit in a second. And so the really important takeaway of looking at this model is that when someone is outside of their window of tolerance, their brain is actually shutting down a bit. So they can't process what we're telling them to do. They're not ignoring us. They can't process and they can't respond in the way that they usually do. And the same is true for us. So often when your child's having a bit of a moment, we might then move outside of our window of tolerance, and we might also be finding it really hard to manage ourselves. And then you're both in the same situation. And if in our life we've experienced any traumatic events, or we're ill, or we're in pain, or we're very stressed, that window is narrower. And it means that it's much easier for us to move outside of that. So sometimes our children with SEND, they're finding the world very, very stressful. And there's lots of different transitions going on. They're not really understanding the world around them. And so then it's much more likely that they'll move outside of that window on a regular basis. And that can lead us to describing them as having challenging behaviour. But the reality is the world is challenging them. And as a parent, I just want to acknowledge here that it is really, really easy for us to experience a feeling of frustration and inadequacy, and feel like we have no idea what to do to help our children when this is something that's happening very regularly. But sometimes just understanding that it's outside of your child's control can really help. So this is just a bit of an extension of that, to acknowledge that if our children are regularly going to a state of fight or flight or freeze or fawn, and we haven't got time to go into detail of all of those things, they might be feeling in survival mode on a daily basis. And survival mode is there to keep us safe. But for some of our children with SEND, they're living in survival mode day to day quite often. And with things that we would consider to be normal daily experiences, because at the moment, maybe the world isn't set up quite right for them. And it's so important that we understand that that's a physiological process, because that allows us as parents to forgive ourselves and go, do you know what? This is not a choice. It's not that they're doing this because they want to make life difficult for me, or they're not listening to me, or they're deliberately doing the opposite of what I'm saying. It's actually that at this point in time, their brain can't physically process what's going on. So I just want you to take a deep breath for a minute and have a bit of time to reflect for yourself, because when we talk about behaviour that challenges, we are a really important part of that positioning. So we can't just talk about our children, we need to consider ourselves. So I want you to read through the slide, and I'm going to read through it with you. Imagine a time in the last month where you felt stressed and completely overwhelmed. So I don't know what it would be for you that triggers that feeling. For me, I know as someone who's working full time and also managing a household, it's things like when I come home from work, there's a sink full of washing up, there's dinner to cook, there's homework to do, there's people that need baths. All of those things add up for me. Sometimes, because I'm in a really neurodivergent household, there are lots of different sounds in the background. The TV, the microwave beeping, someone talking really loudly, someone drumming or playing guitar. All of those sounds start to get quite overwhelming for me when I've got that workload in my head, or the perceived workload of all of these jobs I need to get done. And I know those are the times when I feel stressed and completely overwhelmed, and maybe like I can't get all of these things complete. And I want you to put yourself in that position, and then I want you to think about, what would you do to make you feel better, or what would make you feel better in that moment? What do you need? What do you need from the people around you? What do you need from that environment? What is going to make you feel more regulated and more back in your window of tolerance in that moment? And I know when I've done this and we've been able to do the activity, the most common things people say are time to be alone, space, time to calm down. You get a bit of a split of people. Some people want reassurance from those around them and a hug. Some people want everyone to leave them alone and a bit of isolation. Some people want someone to step in and help them with the tasks in quiet, just alongside them. But ultimately, almost no one ever says, I want someone to come in and to insist I do something right at that moment and to keep pushing until I do it. That is almost universal as a human need, that when we start to get overwhelmed, what we need is someone to take those things away and not add more in. And I want you to then put yourself back in that moment. And I want you to consider that whilst you feel this way, someone comes to you with a task and won't take no for an answer. So they keep talking to you, demanding you do something, pulling on you, touching you physically. You need to do this right now. And what would your reaction to that be? And we all have a very different tolerance for what we can take in moments and how we might respond. But it's interesting to put ourselves in those shoes and think about how that might be experienced. So overwhelm and distress are human responses. They're not exclusive to children or to children with SEND. It is a human response to a situation you are finding impossible to manage. And that includes us in that equation as well. And if you process things differently and have a different sensory system and different social and cognitive styles and physical needs, that means it's more likely that you'll reach the point of dysregulation or distress sooner. And also helps us to understand a little bit how we can be helpful in those moments, because when we think about what we need, that's often also what our children need. But sometimes with children, there's kind of a lot of pressure on us to get them to comply in that moment, and we might continue to push when we know it's not helpful and it's actually making both of us feel worse. So how do we encourage change? And change is always a gradual process. There is no one thing anyone can give you that is going to be a magic bullet fix for all the things you're struggling with. And anyone that says that they can give you that is absolutely lying. The reality is the only thing we can control is ourselves. That is what is within our control. We want to believe we control other things, but we don't. We might control a little bit to do with the environment, but ultimately what is within our control is ourselves and how we function. And when we're functioning under the illusion of controlling behaviour, we are really stressed. We feel ineffective. We feel whatever we put into place doesn't work, or it works for a period of time and then it stops working. And we also risk our relationship with our children breaking down because we're constantly pushing and pushing and pushing to try and change something that is innate to that child. So what I want to give to you here is this idea that we can focus on what we can control, which is ourselves, and we can have a plan for ourselves, and we can shift ourselves to a point of understanding that this is where my child is at right now, and that is absolutely okay. There is only one thing I can control, and that's myself. And I can be in charge of creating a calm atmosphere by choosing to keep myself calm. And that's a choice we can make in advance. So often the first question I get asked by parents when I go out and support them in regards to a certain behaviour is, how do we get them to stop? How do we get them to stop doing this? And the answer is so uncomfortable, because we're trying our best as parents. And I've been here so many times. We're exhausted. We've been given many, often inappropriate traditional strategies that we've tried and they haven't worked. And we feel absolutely tired out and like we have nothing left to give. And the answer to this question of how do we get them to stop is we don't. We don't get them to change. We change ourselves and we change our responses. And in doing so, we create meaningful shifts over time that encourage change, but don't change the children that we've got into being compliant and doing things that they're uncomfortable with. So, and it's an odd shift because it takes a long time to feel okay with that. But when you do, it actually takes the pressure off you brilliantly, because we're slowing ourselves down. We're making a plan for ourselves in advance, and we're reframing our understanding of behaviour. So we're understanding that standpoint that actually our child is doing the best they can at the moment. And if they're not doing very well, or we feel that they're really struggling, we can change the way we respond. But often if we feel burnt out and we feel unsupported and our well-being is not good, we might feel that we can't do this. And that's why we are the most important part of this equation, and our well-being and the position that we're in and how much education we have around the needs that our children have. I think you've probably all heard this analogy before, but it's a little bit like being on a plane and putting your own oxygen mask on first. If we are in survival mode ourselves, and if we are reacting in the moment, we're not going to be able to help a child calm down, because our brains will be in survival mode, and we're likely to push something that is just making the situation worse. So if we teach ourselves the whole context, and we remind ourselves in those moments our child is not doing this deliberately and cannot stop and calm down, we're more likely to respond calmly. So it works a little bit like having a plan for yourself in advance. I know it's likely that even with my best efforts, this might happen. How am I going to be in that situation? And we're going to decide not to let the pressure to deal with that situation in a particular traditional way. And we're going to control our actions, and we're going to let that dictate the situation. So we choose in advance that no matter how bad a day our child's having, we'll stay calm and we'll allow them to regulate, and we'll have grace with ourselves and forgive ourselves when we have a bad day too. And often over time, it's not an immediate thing, but it does reframe how we're seeing our own children. And we understand that this isn't deliberate, and that they're often afraid and in distress, or have no other way of responding to that situation in the moment. So it's taking a strengths-based approach. And as a parent, this changed everything for me, but it made my relationship with them much better, because I started to understand that this isn't a choice. And if something's not a choice, you can't stop it without help. So I'm just going to go over some of the different reasons why our children with SEND might struggle a little bit more to stay regulated, or they might be described as having behaviour that challenges. So there are lots and lots of different factors in this. I'm not going to cover all of them here. And also, your child's unique and is completely different to every single other child on the planet, regardless of whether they've got a diagnosis of something or not. And so it's not possible for me to cover all the different reasons why they might work in a different way. But these are some of the potential differences on this slide that we need to be able to consider as parents, to be able to understand why it is that our child is a bit different. And and to appreciate that this doesn't mean that the way our child is doing things is wrong. It's just different. And often people who have special educational needs and disabilities can struggle in different environments, because most of our systems are set up for neurotypical children and adults, and it might just be that that's not working for the child that we have. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of these things. So processing, it might take longer for your child to respond or to understand instructions. They might have a delayed or different response to emotional events. So it might be that by the time that your child has processed something that's happened like 2 days ago, even, they might respond to that then. And actually we're thinking, I have no idea what's going on now, but it's taken them a while to process and really think about how they're feeling about that situation. It might mean that they need extra time to carry out a task. It might mean that it's harder to filter out background noise in certain environments. Communication, so you might have a child who communicates in a completely different way, or is not speaking yet, or has a difference in the way that they communicate, or unable to communicate, I guess, in a way that we would usually say is typical for a child of that age. It's really hard to think about how to word that. You might have a child who likes to talk for a long time on a particular topic. You might have a very verbal child at this age, but you might find that they might repeat words or phrases over and over again for enjoyment. Might have differences in the way they use their body to communicate. It might be difficult to get their attention if they're very focused on things. You might have a child who you notice reacts in a very different way to the sensory environment. And it might be that they're over or undersensitive to sensory input that's in the environment. It might mean that they either avoid or get distressed by certain situations, or they might seek out lots of sensory experiences. And we haven't got time to go over all of those things here, but it's really important for us to understand that we learn everything through our sensory processing. So actually, if the sensory environment is either giving you too much of what you need or not enough of what you need, it's very hard for us to be in that window of tolerance to begin with and feel calm and able to learn. And it might also be that those internal processes, things like hunger and thirst and tiredness and feeling hot and cold, aren't being processed either. And we can't see that. That's on the inside. So that might be having a significant impact on what we see on the outside. And also things like toileting. So if you're not processing those signals that you need to go to the toilet, you might not know. Play preferences, attention and cognitive styles. So you might notice your child gets very focused really deeply on one thing at a time, and finds it really hard to transition between different tasks without lots of time and lots of warning and lots of kindness. They might have areas that they're really interested in that seem a bit different to other children, or they might take lots of time to engage with something, or they might have attention styles where they like to move between different things all of the time, and that's fine too. Play preferences, they might play in ways that feel different to us. They might be using resources in unique ways that we've never seen before, and we've been programmed to think that we play with toys in a certain way. It might be that you notice that their preferred way of playing is actually very sensory. So they like playing with things that have particular feels, particular looks, particular touch, like whatever it is that your child is motivated by, you might find that they go towards that. They might have a really rich internal narrative and play style and don't need other children to play with for enjoyment. And that might feel different to us. The developmental pattern might be completely different to this frame of, give me the normal child, but this idea of what normal typical development looks like, it might be very different for our children. And that can look completely unique in all of our children. It might be that your child reads but actually finds it really hard to talk to people. It might be that your child is perhaps really strong with numbers, but actually is finding it really tricky with self-care skills like learning to use the toilet. But the reality of this is that all of our children have a completely unique developmental pattern, and it's absolutely okay for that to be the case. And it might be that you have a child that seems very easily upset and gets distressed very often, or might appear not to react at all to emotional things. And And sometimes this can be one of the most tricky things to manage, because we might feel that as parents, we're not doing a very good job if they're getting upset a lot, or we want to try and help keep them calm all of the time. And if you've got a child that is constantly getting upset, it can be a really difficult experience for us. Okay. So I think I'm just going to do one more slide, and then I'm going to hand over to Meggie to take you through some of the strategies we can put in place to help with this. So I just wanted to put a slide in on stimming. So stimming is what would be called self-stimulatory behaviour, and is often associated with children that are autistic. However, stimming is something we all do, whether we're autistic or not. So think about the things you do to make your body feel just right. And it might be things like chewing on the back of a pen, or twirling your hair, or, I mean, clearly I'm moving back and forth on the chair constantly just because that makes me feel comfortable when I'm presenting to you. And, you know, if you're in a situation where you feel things make you a bit nervous, you'll naturally do more of those things because they help you to feel okay. And we're in a situation where we have certain kinds of stimming that we consider to be normal. So again, if we're chewing on the back of a pen, or if we're chewing gum, or if we're clicking our knuckles, those are all fairly typical ways of making our bodies feel okay. However, we also have ways of stimming within us as humans that we then associate with being autistic, for example. But there's no reason why any person shouldn't be allowed to make themselves feel comfortable. And that can be repetitive movements, sounds, or actions. It can be listening to or watching something over and over and over again because it gives you comfort. It can be internal. It can be completely invisible to other people, but you might be doing things in your head. And often this is to self-regulate from overwhelm, and that might be really positive. You might be really excited, or it might be really negative, and it might be a way that you make your body feel okay in that situation. It might be because you just enjoy doing it and it makes you feel good and you experience joy when you do it. But it's also really important for us to understand that sometimes if the environment isn't right, it can become self-injurious. So things like headbanging. And that's when we need to take on the responsibility to understand what might be going on that we can improve to make sure that that person doesn't get to the point that that's happening. And that isn't about physically stopping the person from doing it. It's about seeing the fact that that person needs us to do things and to provide an environment in a different way that leads to that happening less often. So I'm going to hand over to Meggie now, because she's going to go over some of these strategies we can put into place.
Thanks, Tanya. So one key opportunity we have is predictability. Predictability creates routines and environments where children are confident in what's going to happen. They know what's coming, which automatically makes them feel safer, makes them feel more regulated, and it makes them feel ready to face the day. So where we can build routine and structure that will help our children feel safe. Not just our children, it can help us. If we know what's happening at what time, you can prepare for it, you can plan for it, and you can move forward through your day. Little things like keeping your routine exactly the same. And I know when it gets to the weekend, we'd all love a lie-in, but actually if our child gets up at 7:30, yes, some of you look at me and probably thinking, no, it's 4 or 5 a.m, mine too. But it's if we know that it's the same time every day, we can start our day in the same way. And having that same start, particularly at that very earliest point in the day, our child is starting their day feeling secure and feeling ready because they know what's happening. They know they wake up. They know that you'll be there. They'll know they brush their teeth first, that hopefully they know that you have breakfast. They know that they can watch their favorite program for the next 10 minutes, and then they know that they go outside, or they know that they get in the car to go to nursery or to school, whatever it is. But that predictability really helps our children know what's coming next and what to expect. Now, we all know that we can't have a 100% predictable day. Monday to Friday may look one way, Saturdays and Sundays will look different. You know, lots of you, I'm sure, are working parents. The way that your shift patterns and your work routines happen will change everything. You know, if you've got a child who's in a nursery, or they may have some days at nursery, some days not. You may have other family members helping you with childcare. So you can't make every aspect of every day exactly the same. We know that, but what you can do is provide ways to help prepare in advance, and to make that as comfortable for your child as possible. Whether this is, you know, if you have Monday to Friday on the fridge and you've got a picture of who they're being looked after today, so that they know that actually today is Monday and on that picture is a picture of my nursery school, I'm going there today. Little things can help with that planning and preparation. You know, you don't need big, complicated visual timetables of every step of the day. You're at home, you haven't got enough space for that. You don't want to laminate every day. Those of us that are nursery nurses at heart love a laminator, don't get me wrong, but you haven't got the time for that at home. But actually there are key moments where you can plan and prepare and have some of those visual prompts to remind your child what's coming and what's happening. You can even use that to help break down some of the more challenging tasks, like getting dressed, toileting and hand washing, brushing your teeth. Little simple photographic routines of first this, then this, then this will help break down that really challenging thing, particularly if there's lots of instructions involved. If you take brushing your teeth, you know, it's selecting a toothbrush, putting the toothpaste on the brush, has to go into your mouth, you have to spit afterwards, you're probably going to put your toothbrush away, you're likely to then wash your hands, but washing your hands involves water, soap, more water, drying them. That's a lot of instruction and a lot of little mini tasks within what we call toothbrushing. So for some of those more complicated and more challenging moments in your day, knowing and understanding what your child needs through that, knowing what those steps are, can then help your child feel more confident in accessing that moment. Plan in advance for when things might be going wrong, or knowing if something's different. If you have got a child that's in nursery, one thing that we often find is that children know and expect to see their key person when they walk in the door, but we all know that, you know, people get sick, people take holiday. Build that relationship with your setting so that actually they'll let you know if they're going to be on holiday beforehand, and they can let you know who that key person is going to be while they're away, so you can help talk about and prepare your child for that change. Or you might be, you know, they might be able to drop you a quick message in the morning because they phoned in sick. So the nursery said, oh, just so you know, Tanya's off sick today, but don't worry, Meggie's going to be at the door to greet you. Little things like that can help plan and prepare for your child for those changes in advance, because you know that they're going to be a challenging moment. So as Tanya was saying earlier, for yourself, have a plan and prepare for how you're going to face your child when that behaviour is challenging. For your child, know that when there are unavoidable changes, where can you put steps in place to help support them? And if you can't put steps in place, do you have, you know, an emergency calm kit, a regulation handbag, you know, things you know help them in the moment in times of distress? Have you got them with you? Have you got those opportunities to give them their ear defenders because you know you're getting on the bus and actually it's got really loud because someone's just got on with a screaming baby? Or have you got particular fidget toys or sensory toys that are really, you know, help them regulate and do those fidgety stimming movements? But actually, have you got it with you? Because if you haven't got it, it's always a big challenge. But actually knowing and understanding what your child needs, plan in advance. Yes, you don't want to be traveling around every day with a suitcase full of things, but knowing what helps. You, as yourselves, as Tanya said, you can control your own behaviours and you can make your responses to behaviour as predictable as possible. And those of you who, you know, you've got mum, dad, mum, grandparents involved, close family, friends, neighbours, anyone who's regularly involved in supporting your child, tell them what your child needs, and again create that predictability of response so that your child knows whichever adult is helping them in that moment, you know, it's not all on you as the one you know, primary carer for your child. Other adults, other parents can help provide that same comfort and that same level of response. And then it's thinking about where can your child have choices and their own autonomy. You know, little things like, you know, your child needs to have a bath or a shower, they need to wash, they need some sort of cleaning. But actually, for your child saying we're going to have dinner and then we're having a bath, that could be too much pressure because they've got no control over those things. But if you can say to them, we need to wash today, do you want to have a bath or a shower? Or we're going to have a shower today, do you want it before dinner or after dinner? Giving them that sense of choice can help bring them that level of comfort, make them feel like they're in control, and can hopefully reduce some of those behaviours that are going to challenge when the moment comes. Either way, they're going to get a wash. And hopefully, you know, where you think about what is in your control, you control that they do wash today, but actually, does it matter if they wash before dinner or after dinner? Just think about what is most important aspects of your day and how you can help your children work through those. We can think about something that's called a low arousal approach. This is where we reduce the sensory input, we might reduce the social input, we may reduce the demands on our child to help bring down what is all of those stresses that they may be facing. So as I was just saying, it's reducing, as Tanya's mentioned as well, it's reducing that stressor, that when you're already heightened, asking your child to do one more thing is not actually going to help bring that behavior down. It's not going to help them calm or regulate. It's just going to make things all the more challenging. So you can prioritize what boundaries you set. There are things that will be non-negotiable. Keeping your child safe will be non-negotiable. But are there things that actually you can be more flexible around? And if now is not the right moment for them, they can wait. Changing their nappy. If they're not soiled, if they've not been in the same nappy for multiple hours, if they say, no, I don't want to do my nappy at this moment, because they're in the middle of, you know, building a tower, actually, you might think, right now, they're not going to get sore, they're not going to get uncomfortable. I can leave that for a little while and we can come back and revisit that moment. So it's just thinking about what boundaries are absolutely non-negotiable, and you will have them. You know, they will need to sit safely while they're eating, or they will need to hold your hand when you're on the long side of a busy road. If they're in the car, they will need to be strapped in and use safety features. But actually, there are other moments where you think, what is the priority for me and my child right now? And then you can think about, actually, what do we need to push for and what actually doesn't matter at the moment. It may be they haven't had a bath for 4 or 5 days and they really need one now, but actually you washed their hair yesterday. If they've said they don't want to wash their hair today, we might be able to let that one go, rather than create a battle that neither of us need, and now before bedtime we've heightened all of our emotions. Or, you know, if you're at home with your child during the day, you might think, actually, when they are calm and settled after their lunch, they would rather have a bath at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's a more accessible time for you and your child. Doesn't matter that typically people bath first thing in the morning or last thing at night. They've washed. That was what was important. So just think about, what can you let go of? What demands can we avoid? And then actually, what can we push for? It's about remembering to be curious. And if your child is saying that they don't want to do something, or showing you that actually something you've asked of them or expected of them, they are giving you clear signals that that's not what they want. Think about what that might be. Think about what that behavior could be telling you, and be curious. You know, come to their level. Try your best to see it through their eyes. Make sure you take that moment of calm for yourself, so that you can actually look at and try to understand what's happening, or what it looks like in their world for them. Join them in their own world. When we think about a low arousal way, it just means reducing some of those distractions, but it also may mean reducing that overwhelm that's around us. You can't control everything, but in your own home, it may be that your child, you might notice their behaviour is escalating if you've got the TV on whilst you're cooking dinner, whilst older siblings are shouting, playing another game. And actually, there's so many things going on that's really busy for your child. Think about what you can take out of that environment to reduce it. Think about how you could give them strategies to stop feeling so overwhelmed. So whether it's ear defenders to reduce noise, think about, actually, if you know the children aren't actively watching the TV, let's turn it off. You know, or one parent is cooking dinner, can you shut the door to try and reduce all the sounds and smells from dinner? Can your child go out in the garden with another parent or an older sibling if it's safe to do so, so that they've got a bit of distance from some of those sort of sounds and noises and smells that are causing that challenge? So just take a moment and think about some of those really challenging moments in your day, and just take it from a sensory perspective. Actually, what information am I receiving as an adult in this environment? And actually, what might that look like for my child, particularly if they have sensory processing differences? So it's thinking about the environment, physically, what's happening, what's going around us, and the other people that are in that place for your child. We know that these things are often easier said than done. I know that, you know, as parents, we're often exhausted or overwhelmed ourselves. Our priority is meeting our child's needs and taking care of their needs. And it's important to just remember to be really kind to yourself, because you are doing your best. And you only know what you know. You know, it's very easy for other people to come in and have an assumption and take a snapshot and a viewpoint of you and your child and your lives and think they know how to help. And don't get me wrong, they have lots of professionals have good intentions, they have lots of ideas that are worth trying, lots of support that they can give you, but you only know as far as you know, and all of that information you have about your child is really valuable information. And where you are able to have professionals who are working alongside you, share that information and work together to help create the right support for your child. But also it's about being trustworthy just for your child. When you say you're going to do something, do it. When you mean what you say, it's so important, because our children then trust the information they're receiving from you, they trust the environment and the example that you're setting, and they will feel safer. Giving choice and autonomy can help reduce so many stressors that actually often there are so many things that we do for our children or to our children because we live busy lives, and there are things that to do and things that have to be done. But where you're able to, giving that opportunity for a choice, giving them an opportunity to feel like they are in control, even if it's as simple, you know, it's something that you're very much still in control of, but actually giving them that feeling of being in control will help reduce some of those challenging behaviours. Lots of children are often described as seeking control or attention seeking, needing attention and connection, and actually giving choices can help resolve some of those challenges that you will face. And it's not to say that you're relaxing all of your expectations and that you've got no boundaries. It's just thinking about, what do we need to keep our child safe, and then where can I be flexible and meet the child where they are in their own world and their own journey. When your child is communicating with you, whether it's verbally, whether it's through different communication devices, whether it's through their behaviours and their actions, try your best to listen and understand what they're trying to get across to you, and actually validate it and believe them. If your child is saying something hurts, or that something's hard, or that they've been upset, or they're feeling anxious, even if you think it's not really a big thing, try your best not to minimize it. You and your child are a team, and you work together and you solve problems together. You are your child's biggest advocate, and you always will be, doesn't matter how old they get. So work with your child, allow them to feel heard, and provide that support that you can. The use of language, as I think Tanya really heavily lent on earlier, the way we use language about our child can make a huge impact on the way we feel about our child and our relationship, the way our child feels about our relationship and themselves, and actually about the way others feel about our child. Using really careful strengths-based language, language that focuses on our child being an individual and a human who might find things hard, but they are a unique person, will really help frame everyone's mindset towards working towards, what can this child do, what can they access, what do they enjoy, and how can we give them more opportunities to be joyful and engaged and have those opportunities. You know, lots of people, as we grow up, we will develop passions and interests, and we get to do them. People get hobbies and they get to do them all the time. It's also okay for our children to do that. Just because your child loves to play with blocks doesn't mean that actually we need to take them away to introduce new interests. Let them play with their blocks, teach them new ways of building with their blocks, teach them new different building techniques, show them books or videos about different building structures and bigger building concepts like bridges and towers. Because why not? It's joyful, it's a way to connect, and actually they are learning in every moment. They are playing with what they enjoy, and you can teach them all the other things that you want them to learn whilst being in their world and enjoying it with them. And just where you can, make sure that you are keeping that safe space. Your child might need a quiet, calmer space to help decompress and regulate themselves. They might need a more physical space, opportunities to bounce and move, some music to move their body to help regulate themselves. You'll know your child, you know what they need, and try and create that safe space where they can access what they need. Sometimes we can jump to using those sanctions and that sanctional behaviour, but actually when our child's already distressed, that's just going to add more to, it's adding fuel to the fire rather than giving them that safe opportunity to re-regulate themselves. I'm very conscious that we are pushing on time here. But radical acceptance and having a plan for ourselves. Know what you need in those moments that are challenging. Know what you need to help regulate yourself. For example, if you know it's likely that during the day your child will become dysregulated before dinner, because this is just typical for them, and that they may hit out or become more distressed, they might pull things and put things in places that you don't want them to. Think about what you can do in this moment, plan ahead and how you can meet that. You might have something like a calm box that's full of motivating and interesting things that keep them busy and engaged. You might give them a small snack so that they can eat something whilst you're cooking dinner and then move on. Or it might be around they're genuinely hungry, and do you have the capacity to move dinner 15 minutes, half an hour earlier? Just think about what that plan might look like for you. Switch from fighting against something to accepting it and planning and making it work for you and your family. It's not going to look the same for next door, for your aunt, for your siblings that are raising their own children. It needs to work for you and your family and have your own plan. Simple things you can include is communicating in different ways or in every way. Know what's right for your child. Simple instructions like now we're doing this, next we're doing that, or first we're doing this, then we're doing that, can just help break down those tasks and make your child feel like they're in control of what's happening. Songs can be really motivating. Language that's processed musically often goes into the other side of the brain, and actually children may be able to follow along more easily. So singing about washing your hands or singing about putting away the toys, again, that consistent song can help your child feel like they know what's happening and they're in control. There is something called intensive interaction, which is a way of engaging with your child. There are more resources online available to help you understand what that looks like, but really it's breaking into your child's world, letting them take the lead. But you, as on the switch that, you can also model what you want to see from your child. If you want them to behave in a certain way, make sure that you and the rest of the family are also doing that. It's not one expectation for them and another for you. Everyone has the same expectations. So it's not do as I do and not as I say. No, it's not do as I say and not as I do. It's do as I do and not as I say. Everyone has those same expectations. There's also lots of different physical resources you can use to help communication, whether it's signing in different ways, whether it's using AAC devices, sort of communication boards, or whether it's using sort of sound buttons or recorded items. Just labeling some of those key resources that you and your child will use can be really beneficial. So just as a final reminder, all behaviour stems down to is building a really strong relationship. Build that rapport with your child, spend time with them, know them, trust them, develop a sense of empathy, approach their behaviour with as little judgment as you can, and develop that mutual respect. Your child is a human in their own right, and we need to work with them where we can, be curious about what they're doing, understand where they're coming from. And if we don't understand, that's okay, because whilst it may not make sense to you, it's likely making sense to them. So think about some of those different strategies and techniques you can help, but make sure you're breaking into their world and supporting them at their level where they need. As we started with earlier, children do well when they can. And 1 minute over. But thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you all today. And I hope you found something really useful or beneficial from this session.